Welcome to the Worldwide Doula podcast. I'm Barry, I'm a registered nurse and birth doula, and each week I'm joined by a new guest speaker to talk about all things pregnancy, birth, babies, and parenthood. So it's time to sit back and relax as we get into some juicy topics. Hi everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Today I'm joined by the lovely Elizabeth Beeker. Elizabeth is a birth doula and childbirth educator in Hillside County, Michigan, where she provides birth and postpartum education and support to mothers and their families. Welcome to the podcast, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for coming to talk to me today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's so nice to actually finally meet you. So why don't we just start by telling us about yourself a little bit and tell us why you became a doula in the first place?
Yeah, so I'm in southern Michigan in a town called Hillsdale County, or the county's Hillsdale County, and the town is Hillsdale. I got started on this journey back in this March, officially, is when I took my training. However, I began taking interest in birth when I went on a trip to Africa when I was 14. There, I met a midwife, and that was the first time I had any experience with holistic birth care outside of a hospital system. And it really enlightened me as to all the options that were truly available and just changed my perspective on what birth was. And that kind of started this holistic journey and a passion for education and informed care.
Wow, that is some story. Why did you go to Africa in the first place? Sorry, little detour, but I have to know.
No, that's fine. I went to Africa twice on as a missions trip. So I went with my dad and we went with some missionary friends, and they were located in the Chalbi Desert on the border of Ethiopia and Kenya. And it's one of the most rural places on earth. And so the Gabra tribe there is nomadic. So the midwife served this tribe because the closest hospital care they had was at least 6 hours, like on a helicopter.
Wow. Oh my gosh, that sounds amazing. So now you live in a small town. I can imagine that some of the experience in Africa must have helped a little bit. Did you help with births in Africa?
I did not. I was 14, so it was just a lot of discussion, but she gave me a
Oh,
book
okay.
recommendation called, I think it was Heart and Hands, the midwife book.
Mm.
And that I as soon as I came home, I ordered it from the library and started reading it. And then that just began my interest. And as I became older and, just growing up and being an adult, I became more aware of things like hormones and
Mm.
fertility awareness, just things like that weren't part of my education.
Mm.
And so I really took it in stride and just learned a lot about the female body and all of these different things that I didn't know could affect it, but it just was a particular interest to me.
Well, I think that sounds a bit like me. I like once I started learning about the female body, it just like my interest just took off and I just love it, even though I don't have children yet. But there's so much to learn. Anyway, getting back on track, what's it like being a doula in a small town? I can imagine it would be very different from being in a large city.
Yeah. So I only know what it's like to be a doula in a larger city based on my friend's experience. So I'm about an hour and a half away from Ann Arbor, which is pretty huge. But the city I'm in has the entire county has about 10-ish thousand people, and they're very dispersed. So there's some smaller villages and stuff throughout the area. But the primary thing that I've noticed is most of them don't know what doula care is. A
Mm.
few of them have heard of a midwife, so they assume a doula is just another word for midwife, but they really have no idea what it means to have a doula present at birth. They don't understand why it would be valuable. And most of them haven't been exposed to a birth culture outside of a hospital setting. So they assume, oh, if I'm going to give birth, I should plan for an epidural and I should plan to make plans just in case I need a C-section and all of that stuff. So the biggest thing that I've found as a barrier is just trying to educate people on what doula care is and why it's valuable. A lot of people locally, just because they haven't heard of it, they make a lot of assumptions. Oh, it's for people who have a lot of money to have their own person to do these things. And some people at least in my experience, don't want one because they believe it's going to interfere with the husband's role in the birth. And
Mm,
one thing I try to tell them is a good doula will not interfere with their partner, but will help them feel more equipped so that the partner can care for them better. So it's just a lot of breaking down assumptions, trying to share the information and the evidence. I mean, you and I know in this world that doula care reduces C-section rates by almost 40%. And
mm,
that's not a small percentage. And so there's something about this that's really integral. And I feel a particular passion for it because in my county, we have one of the lowest prenatal care rate in the entire state, let alone Michigan is terrible for maternal death rate. And the US, while it has a bunch of medical resources, has
mm.
some of the highest like medical intervention rates, but also maternal death rates. And that correlation really shouldn't be there if medical care is being used properly.
Yes, I totally understand where you're coming from. And I'm actually very surprised that the US has such bad statistics when they are supposed to be leaders in healthcare. And I constantly always see that there are nurses who are, boycotting against the system and trying to get back their rights and stuff like that. And it still baffles me that people don't know what a doula is when they've been around for so long. And birthing outside the hospital is still thought of as something that hippies do. A lot of my friends and family don't even know what a doula is. And when I tell them, they're like, oh my gosh, I want one. Why wasn't there a doula when I gave birth? I grew up in Byron Bay, which is like the hippie town of Australia. And I think that people tried to avoid hospital as much as possible. I think that it's hard to educate people when they have a fixed view though. So yeah, what are some stigmas and misconceptions that you have heard around birth?
Yeah. So there's a little bit of history. So I am a block away from the hospital. Like I could walk there in 5 minutes. It's a
Mm,
rural hospital too, but they don't do VBACs. They're very small, and so they have limited capacity to do VBACs. But at the same time, some of the people I've met think it's still like this really, really dangerous, almost fatal thing. Like you can't have a VBAC. And so it's just, that's one of them. Another one locally that I've heard about birth is just that there aren't options. And not that
mm,
they would say that there's not options, but they just don't know where to go. And so like formula feeding is the default because we don't have a IBCLC within an hour.
mm.
And a lot of the people in my area, like there's a lot of single moms, there's a lack of childcare, and it just makes it really difficult for people in those situations to get the care that they need and then to believe that they're empowered to continue to breastfeed. And so one thing that I emphasize in my doula care is just saying like I have these resources and we can make sure to get you places. And I've started partnering with other businesses and local people to try to talk about birth culture in our area. We have had a few OBs that while they were well loved by the people that they served, they were like they had great bedside manner. They were not holistically minded. So they would
Yeah.
do 37-week induction so that way they could go on their vacation. And
What?
that was the normal for generations of people locally is that, oh, your baby's too big, your hips are too small, we need to induce you by 37 weeks to accommodate the hospital schedule and this particular OB's personal plans. And so that was one
That's a
of the
tough
things
one.
that, yeah. And it's
Wow.
hard to talk about because
Yeah.
he was a really well respected obstetrician and he was very kind and great bedside manner, but it was very much like he knew what was best for these women and
Yeah.
that's just what was done. And no one argues in at least in the local hospital. There's a little bit of fear mongering that's still going on with, oh, this is super dangerous, you need to get this seen. And there's some give and take with that too because I live in an area where a lot of the women who do give birth are high risk individuals, but I personally don't believe they all have to be. I think a
Yeah.
lot of that can be mitigated with more resources and education.
How are they high risk?
No,
Are
that's fine.
they?
Gestational diabetes,
Oh yeah.
preeclampsia, obesity, and some of those are more dangerous than others. But also, when I was having this discussion with the hospital, they consider some at risk, high risk, simply because of their social situation.
Yeah.
And those types of things I think can be solved other ways. But one thing that we are seeing frequently in our local hospitals, it's neonatal abstinence syndrome. It's basically babies having withdrawal symptoms. I think upwards
From,
of marijuana,
oh
cocaine,
yeah.
methamphetamine.
Yeah.
We have a huge drug issue in my local area. And most of the babies that are born at this hospital have withdrawal symptoms.
I think that's really tough. It's a tough spot to be in because you want the best for the women, but you also have to be really understanding and not judgmental at all. And that's our job, not to be judgmental.
Right.
You haven't gone through a birth yet, but how would you imagine that you would support someone like that?
Well, I think that the first start is honesty and vulnerability. So I need to make sure that I am presenting myself to not just my clients, but to people as someone that they're
Mm.
safe with, someone that they can trust, and that they're not going to be judged by. Um,
And
and
that's
then I think,
exactly what a doula is.
yeah,
And we're
yeah,
not there to judge you. We're there to support you and to educate you on your options. And as you said, they don't know their options. And that's one of the hardest things when you're pregnant and you're in a small town and there's not a lot of medical help around and you're a single mom, say, or you're reliant on some sort of, you're addicted to some sort of substance which affects you. A doula can be a really great place to, you know, feel safe. And that's one
mhm,
of the main things about birth, to feel
yeah,
safe and supported. It makes birth a
right.
hell
And
of a lot easier.
yeah, and as I meet these people, it's just I in my intake form, it's like, have you smoked anything? And it's not as a place of judgment, but because as your doula, it helps me to know. There's some local doulas who will refuse to take moms on any substance, and that really limits their clientele just because they've been burned by it before. But it can be difficult for the doula if they don't know that that's what you're going through because they can't offer resources and
Mm.
some, depending on the types of drugs, it can alter the birth outcome and even just the way that they interact with people. So I heard a story not too long ago about a mom and her doula she wasn't upfront with, and then like there was this whole confrontation in the hospital when she refused to let go of her personal backpack her entire labor, and it kind of led to the CPS thing, and it was just a mess. And so
Mm.
I think it's better for everyone when people feel safe enough to be vulnerable about what they're going through, and then the doula can come and walk alongside of them in this journey and not necessarily be there to fix all of their problems, but be there to help and to encourage and to
Mm.
equip them however possible. One thing that I make sure to tell my parents is, I what you guys choose to do, like regarding like a lot of people smoke marijuana in my area. That's what you choose to do, and that's your choice, and that's fine. But what I want to make sure is that they're equipped, they have the information of like what could possibly go wrong. But primarily on a social level, I do tell them that if they give birth in a hospital setting, their baby's meconium will be tested and CPS will be called if traces of marijuana are found. I believe that's important for parents to know. Most of the time, those cases don't go anywhere because there's such a surplus of CPS calls that
Yeah.
they're not equipped to take that many. So it's most of the time not an issue. Like the babies aren't normally taken away. But
Yeah.
I think it's important to tell them because birth can be traumatic, and the possibility that their CPS gets called and that there's a small investigation is real when you have drugs involved. And I just think it's important to be aware.
Yeah, it's the hard truth, unfortunately. And I've remembered having to call child services on a few parents, unfortunately, working as a registered nurse not that long ago, working in the children's ward. you have to report anything. Like if somebody comes in with a broken arm, you have to question them quite thoroughly. And it's not a judgment, it's a safety thing. And they do really, they shut off, they shut down, and they don't want to answer any of the questions. And we're there to help them. And unfortunately, sometimes that's taking their kids away. But yes, we're there to support them as a doula in making the decisions that are right for them. And sometimes we have to go against our own beliefs and values to support them. But yeah, that's hard work. So you said that you've spoken to some doulas?
Yes, so I'm a part of a doula collective called Better Birth Jackson. It's about an hour away from drive there monthly. And we just kind of sit, talk, brainstorm, and work together at like health fairs and stuff like that.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's actually been a lot of fun and it's really helped me get connected. So there's that. There's some local doulas that I'm not very close with. Yeah, I just haven't had many opportunities to work with them, and they work in a little bit different style than I do. So it's not very good fit. But I've really enjoyed Better Birth Jackson, and through there I've had like some doula mentorship who've helped me get connected to midwives in the area, and they'll just send me resources, and so it's been great.
So I'm very excited because you've finally gotten your first client. And for all the new doulas out there, I read it so many times on chats and on the doula pages. How do you get started? How do you get clients? Why don't you tell us a little bit how you got your clients? Because I have been following you and you've put a lot of hard work in. Talk to a lot of people.
Yeah. So one of the challenges I encountered is that I don't have any children, and I've only attended one birth in an observation capacity. And so people really were hesitant about my experience. So I made sure to double my effort in my education to really show the confidence and show the information that I have and that I can offer to moms. So I guess one of the first things I did is I got connected locally, not necessarily to other doulas, but to people in the birth world. So chiropractors, cranial sacral therapists, went to the hospital and had a conversation with the OBs and just kind of let them know, I'm here. This is what I value. This is what I practice. Here's what I'm here to do. And you'll see me in these scenarios. And then I let them kind of do it back and exchange essentially information and resources. So that's how I got more connected locally. And I did a lot of social media. So every time I met up with someone, I posted about it and posted about how it went. So that way people locally could see what I'm doing and can see the network I'm creating. After that, I got involved in the doula net, the coalition thing. And that helped me get connected to doulas that were within an hour of me and people who could be my backup. I pay a fee to be involved in this. So it's not necessarily like just hanging out with doula friends. It's an organization. And through that, I have a code of ethics that I agree to and that I can be audited by. So local hospitals, if they have an issue with me, they can go to this program directly. And I really value that because it gives my practice a level of transparency that other doulas might not have. Because doulas are an unregulated system, sometimes you don't know what you're getting, but it makes me feel more comfortable knowing that people can hold me accountable for what I say and what I do through this program. And it makes the hospitals feel a lot more comfortable as well.
Yeah.
The next thing I did was I tried to meet moms in my community where they're at. So I founded what's called Moms of Hillsdale County. It's a Facebook group. And through that, people just join, they exchange resources, information. We're working on stroller walks. We have a breastfeeding chat, mom meetups, and I'm planning my first event. It's like postpartum and pumpkin spice or something like that, where
that sounds
postpartum
awesome.
moms, yeah, it's just a place where they can meet and talk about their shared experience. And I'll be there to facilitate, but not to really be involved. I just give them a space because it wasn't there before. So those are some of the things that I did to get started. And what I'm working on right now is getting connected to the local colleges and educating them about doula care. So I just did a presentation at our local college, Hillsdale College. It's a private institution, and I went in and presented on doula care to a women's health class, and I'll be continuing to do that every semester until I'm not able to anymore. And right now I'm working with our local community college to set up some dates that I can present on doula care for them as well. It's called Jackson College.
That's
So
so amazing. I
just
can't,
putting
like,
myself out there.
you got in contact with me because I asked how to crochet a boob, and then watching you grow,
Yeah.
watching you grow has just been actually amazing. And like all the new posts that you do, I see it, and it's like I'm a little bit jealous because I'm not able to go out into my community and do that kind of thing because I'm in Indonesia. It's a little bit of a different situation that I'm in.
Yeah.
But I have really enjoyed watching you grow. When I saw that you got your first client, I was so excited because I'd seen all the hard work that you put in. And that's just it. It doesn't come easy. You can't just like come out of studying and be like, okay, guys, I'm ready. I'm a doula. Come hire me. Like, it takes a lot of effort. I've gone a little bit of a different route. I've made a website. My husband, now husband, is
Congrats, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a beautiful wedding. But what was I going to say? So he's a web designer and he does marketing. So it's definitely worked in my favor. And he helped me navigate making my own website, and I do blog articles, and now I've just started this podcast to educate women because there's not a lot of expat women giving birth in Indonesia, and most of them are in Bali, and it's quite difficult. It's illegal to have a home birth and a water birth in Bali, even though most of the local women still do it. The hospital is kind of doing a scare tactic to try and get more women into the hospital so they can control the maternal mortality rates and also the babies as well. But it makes it very difficult for me, and it's been really hard to connect with doulas in Bali because they're all under the radar, because if you get caught, you probably will get deported. So it's a little bit more difficult here, but I just want to say hard work pays off, and you've done a really great job. So
Thank you.
Part of the reason why I wanted to talk to you.
Thank you so much. I think one of the things I realized, or when I went into this, I had 3 clients lined up, all of which fell through within the first 3 weeks of me finishing my training. And so there was a lot of, oh, it looks like I'm going to have such an influx, and then nothing. Because it was probably 6 months between when I started my journey and then actually getting a client. My first client happens to be a doula, and we found each other on like a doula network. So that was amazing. And so just getting involved in community, and if there's not doulas in your community, finding the nearest one and just reaching out saying, hey, let's grab a coffee and do something and just talk about birth. So that's what I've tried to do, is just find people and meet them where they are. So yeah, I mean, honestly, very few people go into doula care because they want to make it like their career. I find that a lot of people have a certain passion for this topic and end up in doula care because it's so difficult. I mean, any small business owner will tell you it's difficult. And then you're adding this additional element of really vulnerable spaces and interpersonal relationships that last for an extended period of time. And there's few other like careers that would have that same dynamic. And so it's a really special and very important space, but it's not for everyone. And there's a lot of setup and continuous work that has to be done in order to make it successful.
Yeah. And going back to what you said earlier about they're worried about dads being replaced by doulas, we are really just there to educate and to hold the space. And I think a lot of women think that they don't need one, and that's fine. Like, it's not for everyone. But the people who have one normally come back and say, I'm never giving birth without a doula again. Like, that was the most amazing birth experience. Or, you know, just because you have a doula doesn't mean that you'll necessarily have a good birth experience, but it will definitely make it 10 times better, or even just like double times better, whatever that's called. But yeah, so I mean, I do have a question about, I feel like we're jumping back and forth a little bit, but you mentioned earlier that you aren't allowed to have a VBAC, or they won't support a VBAC, which is, by the way, for all the people who don't know what a VBAC is vaginal birth after cesarean. Do they offer breech home delivery, like, or a water birth in the hospital?
Not.
No?
Not through the hospital system. The hospital, if you have a breech baby, it is just C-section. That's
There's
it.
no options. There's no other options.
I have not heard of a local hospital delivering breech ever, especially not my local hospital, but it would have to be very special circumstances. And I think the only one that might do it is U of M, but even then, I don't think so. I don't have enough information, so I'm free to be corrected on it, but no, I've not heard of a breech birth in at a hospital. Some of the local midwives will, as long as their clients are educated and complete certain steps, they will agree to a breech birth, but that's created some animosity between the hospital and the home birth midwives in my area, because there's been some breech births that go wrong, and then they bring them to the hospital, and the hospital gets it creates a lot of tension between this, reinforcing the stereotype that home birth isn't safe because they're bringing in women in bad condition. But those women were educated. They took a lot of time, and they tried flipping the baby. It didn't work. So yeah, nope, no breech births in the hospitals that I know of. As far as the VBACs, when I talk to my local hospital, they just don't do it because they don't have the capacity to do it, but they didn't really specify what that meant. But I know other hospitals in the area that would do VBACs, and then they don't do water births at any of the hospital either. Either they don't believe it's safe, or they're not willing to take certain risks.
Yeah, it's very interesting that in some areas in America, they're like so educated. They read so many research articles. They learn about all the new things that are coming out, and they try it. They support women to do it. And maybe not only in the US, maybe it's all over the world, but there are definitely places that are more advanced,
progressive.
Yeah, exactly. But then in a small town like Hillsdale County is like, it's unheard of. It's completely, no way we're doing that. Don't even consider it. And if there was a woman who was educated and really knew what she wanted and knew what could go wrong, what could go right, it's almost like a oopsie, I had a breech baby at home moment that she completely intended to do, and then she went into hospital just to make sure that everything was okay. I don't know if you listened to my other podcast. I interviewed my mum about my sister's birth. They're twins. They're born 8 hours apart. One was born at home and the other one was born in the hospital via C-section. So she didn't plan anything in particular. She just said, I'm just going to go with what my body wants to do. And she had the first baby. The birth was completely natural. Nothing went wrong. And then the labor stopped. And then she went into hospital because she was like, oh, maybe we should, make sure everything's okay. They went into hospital and immediately the doctors were like, what did you do? Why did you do this? And completely shamed her and said that she just didn't care about her baby. She was going to kill them. And then that's not the kind of mentality that you want when you go into hospital. You want to feel supported and you're doing the right thing. You're doing what your body is telling you to do. And that's mainly what we always tell clients to do. Just trust what your body is telling you.
Yeah. That's the story I've heard from the women in the area who had to go in to the hospital or the local hospital after something went wrong in a home birth, which there's a lot of success stories, but just the reality of it is birth is still you can't control certain aspects, and it doesn't always work out the way that you planned. But when I talked to the local home birth midwife, when she came in with her client, they basically looked at the midwife and said, "You're killing people." And
What? Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
there's
I find it
no
hard to hear this stuff. You
yeah,
know.
I think ultimately it's just there's a lack of middle ground. And I think both sides need to essentially come down off their high horse a little bit so they can have
Mm,
a conversation. Because what's not happening in the hospital as much is informed care and informed consent, and women having the freedom to make certain decisions to opt in or opt out of certain interventions or practices, even if the doctor disagrees. They need to have that freedom. Like, if you think what they're doing is so horrible, like, they still have the freedom to make that decision for themselves.
mm.
Um,
Yes, that's exactly right. It's their body. And even if you educate them and you say, okay, here's the things that can go wrong, at the end of the day, they're taking responsibility for their actions. It's like, sorry to keep putting it back to nursing, but if you give somebody their medication and they say, no, I don't want to take it, you say, okay, well, this is the things that could happen to you if you don't take it. And then they say, okay, cool, I don't want to take it. Then you just say, okay, that's fine. You don't have to take it
right.
and document, because at the end of the day, they still have capacity to consent. And it shocks me to hear that the doctors don't even consent. They don't even educate. They just say, okay, this is what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And they do it. And like 36 weeks delivery in induction, or I can't remember what you said, but just because he wanted to go on holiday, this is the state of our medical like care at the
Yeah.
moment.
And
It's a bit scary, to be
that's why
honest.
conversation is so necessary. And I'm trying to
Yeah.
start that
Yeah.
conversation with my local hospital just to be able to have the
Mm,
freedom to say, you know, like, one of the components that doula care comes from is informed consent, but like also evidence based. So, like, while there's common practices, like whenever you think of a hospital delivery, like a woman giving birth on her back, that's just the image that pops in your head.
yeah.
That doesn't mean that's good for them. And so if the doctor's like, okay, lay back now, we can we can intervene and say, hey, do you want some evidence-based information on what it's like laboring on your back? And just being able to, it's just, there needs to be a space for doctors, doulas, and midwives to all come together and have a conversation about, yes, if they don't do this, they might be more at risk for this thing, but how much is that risk? What are the potential long-term effects? Because while they talk about the potential long-term effects of like a home birth going wrong for the mom or the baby, the potential long-term risks for an epidural also exist. And that's not something that they talk about as much because it's normalized. And
Mm,
I just think we have to normalize birth to a point where everyone's able to have their own beliefs and to be able to hold the same space, and people to recognize that they have a right to birth the way they want to, and whatever that encompasses is something that should be respected, whether it's religious practices,
mm,
whether it's opting in or out for interventions, or who's in the birth room. That's something that
mm.
should be up to the mom and the family and not up to the doctors and the
Yeah.
doulas.
I feel like we've put a lot of hate speech on the hospital. I just want to put it out there that we don't hate the hospital. We want to work with the hospital. Like
Right.
it's more like expressing the difficulties that we come across when we try and, work with the hospital. It is quite difficult. And I don't know, have you found that the obstetricians have kind of looked at you sideways and been like, you're a doula, like what do you even do? Because me
Yeah.
working at a GP clinic, when I said to them that I was going to become a doula, the doctors looked at me like, oh, you're one of those, like you're one of those hippy dippy, you know you're going to kill people kind of a little bit.
Yeah, I personally, I have not experienced that with, I haven't met too many OBs, but I'm very upfront. And so I reach out and kind of tell them, hey, I'm a doula. Here's what I do. Here's what I'm passionate about. And I want to open this conversation up. When I went into the local hospital, I met with OB Brian Sinisco, and we had a really transparent discussion about what he believed the risks of home birth were and why they choose not to offer water birth. And even though I disagree with some of the reasons he gave, we were able to have like an hour-long discussion about each of our perspectives and how we can come together to support the mom. And I think that more of that needs to happen. No one's claimed that I'm hurting people through what I'm doing, but at the same time, like while hospitals come with a lot of shame sometimes with this field, so do doula circles. There's been
Yes.
I've faced more, like, I guess not discrimination, but I've had more run-ins with maybe rude doulas than I have with rude OBs. Most of the time, even if the OBs disagree with the value that doulas have to offer, they're still open to discussing birth and what they do. But I've met doulas that are like, oh my gosh, you're doing a VBAC client, like you have experience to be doing that. And oh, you're too young, or you haven't had kids yet. And so it's just, I think whatever you do in life, you're going to face and encounter people who disagree with what you're doing, whether it's comes to your values or your politics, just the way that you view the world. I don't necessarily think it's exclusive to a hospital versus home birth or doulas and midwives. I don't think it's necessarily these circles. I just think it's the reality of what it means to be human.
Yes. Well, that's good. I mean, that's exactly what you want. You want somebody to be open-minded at the end of the day. After all, we're all looking for the same thing. We all want to have women who are happy, who have healthy babies, and to support them to have a healthy delivery, however that is. And, I just want to put it out there. We're also not saying that C-sections are bad. We support women in their decisions, as we've said a few times. But if you choose to have a C-section, you can still have a doula and you can still have your partner there. And we support all types of births. We support home births, we support hospital birth. Also, we support VBAC. It might be our first VBAC and it might be our 5th or 10th or 50th, but we're all there to support and learn. And we also learn so much from mums and the other people in the birth room. And we're all there to learn, right?
Exactly. And I think when it comes to doula cares, in this conversation, we're not hating the good things that the hospital do, because C-sections are sometimes necessary. And it's really just it should be the woman's choice, and women should be able to make an informed choice and have their consent be valued and respected in the setting. And I feel like in my conversations, most of the time it's that component that's compromised, and that's where the tension comes between holistic providers and a hospital, is because people don't feel heard and listened to in that environment, not because C-sections are terrible or because epidurals are terrible. It's because there's a lack in the hospital setting of consistency when it comes to women being given the opportunity to make informed choices for themselves and to not be shamed if those decisions don't align with what the doctor believes should.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't have said it better myself. All right. Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming to talk to me today. I have to say, it was such a nice chat. I feel like I'm all alone on my little island over here.
Yeah, it was lovely. It's so exciting to be able to connect with people all around the world.
Yeah, definitely. And I look forward to having more conversations with you in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Guys, you can find Elizabeth at EB Birth Services on Instagram, or Elizabeth Beeker's Birth Services on Facebook. Sorry, that's a bit of a mouthful. And make sure you tune in for next fortnight for another juicy episode. For more information on pregnancy, birth, and parenthood, head over to my website or Instagram at blissfulbirth.co. And just a little reminder, the information contained in this podcast is here to educate and empower, and does not replace the advice of your own healthcare provider.